Hello, everybody. My name is Rabbi Daphne Lazar-Price, and I am the Executive Director of Jofa, the Jewish Orthodox Feminist Alliance. It is my honor and pleasure to have this conversation with Melissa Rosen, who's the Director Training and Education at Sharsheret. Her leadership embodies what it means to care for the whole person, body, spirit, and community. For those of you who are not familiar, Sharsheret is an extraordinary organization that has transformed how our community understands and responds to women's health, particularly around breast cancer, ovarian cancer, and hereditary risk. Sharsheret's work is grounded in deep compassion, clinical excellence, and Jewish values. And that is why the partnership between Sharsheret and Jofa is such a natural and powerful one. If you were at the Jofa conference barely 2 weeks ago, which now feels like a lifetime ago, I'm sure you had the chance to meet Melissa and the team from Sharsheret, both at their display table and at the workshop presentation on egg freezing. And together, we're committed to ensuring that women are not navigating health challenges in isolation, that their voices are heard, that their needs are met, and that their dignity, when I say they, I mean our dignity, all of it is honored. Melissa brings to this work not only professional expertise, but profound empathy and moral clarity, reminding us that supporting women's health is not ancillary to communal leadership, it is really central to it. Before we hear from Melissa, I'm going to put on my rabbinic hat, literally, and spend a few minutes reminding us about the value of preserving our health and taking measures to prevent illness, because I think that's exactly what's prescribed by the Torah. At the outset, I really just want to begin with a truth that we rarely say outside in leadership spaces, especially in women's leadership spaces, and that is exhaustion is not a virtue, self-erasure is not sacrifice, and burnout is not a halachic ideal. And yet many of us, especially women who lead, live as though it were. We push through pain, we normalize depletion, we delay care, and we tell ourselves that tending to our bodies, our mental health, our reproductive health, our rest is indulgent, or worse, selfish. And halacha says the exact opposite. So today I want to explore a radical and deeply traditional claim. And I would go as far to say that according to halacha, women's health is not ancillary to leadership, it is foundational to it. Not only because healthy leaders lead better, but because Jewish law understands the body itself is a sacred vessel entrusted to us by Hashem. So the body is a trust, it's not property. And the Torah reminds us, Rak hishamer lechu ushmor nafshecha me'od, that you should guard yourself and guard your soul exceedingly well. And the rabbis understand that this is not spiritual advice, but it really is a legal obligation. And Rambam Maimonides says that since in Hilchot Deot, since maintaining a healthy and sound body is among the ways of Hashem, for one cannot understand or have any knowledge of the Creator if the person is ill. Therefore, they must avoid that which harms the body and accustom themselves to that which is helpful and helps the body become stronger. Why? Because, as I said, the body is it's a trust to us. And halacha requires medical treatment. And in fact, halacha is overridden anytime that there is a need for medical care, including preventative care. It's not just about emergency rescue. So halacha doesn't create a kind of hierarchy between like who's important and who's not. Everybody's important. Everybody's made b'tselem Elokim in God's image. And so for that, we have to carry that responsibility of taking care of ourselves so that we can be good and strong and functional leaders. There's always the saying of when you're on an airplane, if something happens with the oxygen level, that you should, put the mask on yourself first and then take care of others. This is a kind of halachic broad approach to that. I also just want to look at a couple of examples from Tanakh. If we look at the story of Hannah, and the cost of misreading her pain when she enters into the Mishkan in Shiloh and she pours out her soul in prayer and she's not eating and she's weeping and she's in profound distress. And Elia Cohen looks at her and says, "Are you drunk?" And he misdiagnoses her suffering. And then she realizes that she must advocate for herself. And she talks about being a woman of sorrowful spirit, and how she's really pouring out her soul before Hashem. And what she teaches us is something that is devastatingly contemporary, and that is that women's pain is often misunderstood, minimized, or moralized. And when women internalize that misreading, they delay care, silence, and they silence symptoms, and they carry the burdens alone. And they shouldn't have to. We shouldn't have to. But if we notice what happens next in the story, we see that Hashem doesn't rebuke Hannah for her anguish. On the contrary, Hashem responds to it. And her feeling and her, I'm sorry, her healing, both physical and emotional and spiritual, precedes her leadership. And only after her pain is honored does she become the mother of a Kohen and a theological voice, whose prayer shapes Jewish liturgy forever, right? Like we learn from Hannah that when we pray, when we daven, and when we do so silently, that our lips move. And that's to mimic how she prayed and to honor her contribution to prayer. Um, there's a whole other conversation to be had about the erasure of women more broadly that I won't get into here, other than to say that there is nothing in halacha that allows for the erasure of women from the public sphere, not from publications, not their voices, not their names. And it's especially problematic in some communities where they won't bring themselves to talk about women's illnesses, right? They won't say the word breast cancer. They won't say the word ovarian or uterine because it's somehow not tzniut, and so not sanua, not modest. And so it's really important to become an advocate for yourself and for other women, and to be unafraid to like really speak truth to power, kind of in the way that Hannah did when Eli challenged her. Um, and not to allow yourself to be shamed or silenced. And certainly, these are the kind of role models that we need to be as leaders. I want to spend another few minutes I want to talk about Miriam, also, who she leads the women in Shirat Hayam, and she's called a prophet. But later she's struck with Sarat and is forced outside of the Machaneh, outside the camp. And what happens? The entire people stop traveling. The Torah is very clear that they did not continue their journey until Miriam was brought back after her 7 days of seclusion and exclusion. And in this moment, our Jewish tradition embeds a radical leadership ethic here that a community that moves forward while its women leaders are unwell is not moving forward at all. I really want to hold on to that image because I really think it's really important that Miriam's body matters enough to halt the march of history, right? She's like literally all of Bnei Israel is held up from trying to reach like when I say held up, it is like a self-realization that they need to hold themselves up so that Miriam can be with them. And that's a really important model that the Torah holds up. And then finally, from the Tanakh, I want to point to Shifra and Pua, the midwives that we read about in Parshat Shemot, I believe, and they defy Pharaoh's decree to kill the Hebrew boys. And they do it out of a fear of Hashem and not out of fear of Pharaoh. So they protect life not abstractly, but biologically. They are the experts in women's bodies, and they understand birth and blood and breath and nursing and all of that. And their leadership is rooted in reproductive knowledge and medical courage. And women's health is not peripheral to liberation. It's actually like the front line of it, right? None of it, like Bnei Israel would not have been redeemed from slavery and exited Mitzrayim, Egypt, if not for the birth of Moshe. So I want to spend just a couple minutes just talking about broad ideas. And one is that everything is grounded in pikuach nefesh. And it's something that, there's a lot of time that there's guilt if there's a medical emergency on Shabbat, if there's all kinds of, something that like you have an important event coming up at work and you're not feeling right. And what do you put off? And the answer is it doesn't matter what it is, pikuach nefesh overrides everything. So, certainly overrides Shabbat, and fasting, including, Yom Kippur, and nearly every other prohibition. So if there are, pregnancy complications, you override halacha. If there are mental health crises, you override halacha, which we saw very clearly during the pandemic. If there's a risk to future fertility, that's certainly a consideration. And if there's pain that impairs functioning, that's also taken very seriously. Um, and the Talmud also permits violating Shabbat to save a pregnant woman, even if the danger is uncertain, because halacha understands that women's bodies are sites of sacred risk and sacred potential. It's a bit of a digression, but when we talk about whose obligation it is to have children, the obligation falls to men. And why is that? Because there's a recognition that every pregnancy has potential catastrophic outcomes and consequences. And Maimonides says that you cannot be obligated in a mitzvah that puts your life actually at risk. We also know that pain matters, that the Talmud repeatedly rules leniently when it comes to tsar, suffering, and pain is not dismissed, and it's not valorized for spiritual growth. And the same is true also for mental and emotional health. Mental and emotional health, we talk about mental health as though the brain isn't a part of the body when the brain is very much a part of the body. So, maybe we'll get to a point that we just talk about health instead of mental health as though the brain isn't connected in the same way as, my leg is connected. Um, so again, taking good care of ourselves as leaders, if there's postpartum vulnerability, if there's grief, anxiety, depression, all of those things need to be considered as part of refuat hanefesh and refuat haguf, spiritual and physical healing. And finally, I think it's finally, I just want to go into why women's health is a leadership issue, because it's not just about compassion, it's about capacity. When women don't sustain their health, our decision making narrows, our creativity contracts, our patience thins, our vision shortens, and our presence just erodes. And leadership becomes reactive instead of generative. Jewish leadership demands that all of our there are different categories of Hebrew words for different kind of knowledge. So there's da'at, bina, and chokhmah, which we can translate as clarity, discernment, and wisdom. And those are embodied qualities. And a depleted body can't sustain expansive leadership. And Jewish law never asks us to lead by breaking ourselves. This is actually like a good reminder also, as we look ahead. We're just finishing Hanukkah, but in a minute it's going to be Pesach also. And so just to just remind yourself, everything needs to be done b'seichel and um, not to, not to overdo it. There are obligations to seek care, which I know that Melissa will get into. There are obligations to set boundaries, and for that, I'm always grateful for Shabbat. It is it is the most constant thing. It's either Shabbat or we're getting ready for Shabbat or it's just after Shabbat. But my whole everything revolves around Shabbat as a recognition of like this is my built-in boundary, and a time to really replenish. And then I think that's where I want to end. Just the recognition that if we're expected to lead as whole human beings, then we need to take care of ourselves as whole human beings. And I'm going to hand it off to Melissa.
Thank you so much. What a perfect way to start. And, you know, you were speaking about caring for ourselves to enable us to remain leaders. And that reminds me that I'm also going to present the opposite, which is when you care for yourself, you become a leader. And that's one of the points of today. I'm going to thank you for your leadership and remind all of you the subtle impact you are having on women in your community. I'm also going to talk a little bit about how to determine personal cancer risk and ways to mitigate it, and how you can raise awareness. So, like Daphne said, Sharsheret is the only organization that offers culturally nuanced support for Jewish women and families impacted by breast cancer, ovarian cancer, or heightened risk. I'm going to give you a little bit about Sharsheret just on one foot because it will sort of connect the leadership to the cancer prevention. So why a Jewish organization? Well, there are two main reasons. One is a genetic issue. 1 in 400 people, men and women, carry a mutation on one of their BRCA genes that raises the risk of a diagnosis dramatically. 1 in 400. But for those of Ashkenazi descent, that's 10 times the risk at 1 in 40. So we need to be more aware. And then there are also nuances, places that being from or Jewish intersect with a cancer diagnosis. One of the examples I often use is Pesach. You talked about it, and it's true, right? You might not have the energy to celebrate and observe Pesach the way you want to, the way you're comfortable doing, and have to deal with that. Or, you say in a blink it'll be Pesach, and it's just been a blink since the Chagim, the high holidays, right? And I'm thinking about the liturgy, right? Going into Yom Kippur, knowing you're going to need to recite Unatana Tokef, who shall live and who shall die, is very difficult, even if you've said it every year since you started going to shul on a regular basis, when you're facing a life-altering and potentially life-threatening illness. So there are a lot of reasons for a Jewish organization to help the community deal with this. Sharsheret doesn't offer any medical advice because that's not our role. So today I'm going to ask you to learn about yourself and your own needs so that you can you can ascertain your own medical needs. If we have time, I'm happy to talk a little bit more about Sharsheret, but I want to get into the meat of the conversation. At Sharsheret, we really are into stories. It motivates what we do, and everybody has a Sharsheret story. And so maybe you already know someone who was helped by Sharsheret, maybe even you were, or maybe today is the start of your Sharsheret story and you'll continue to be involved in this really important issue. But I want to share mine super quickly. So I was diagnosed with breast cancer 12 years ago. Happens to be my diagnosis was a direct result of chest radiation for a different cancer 17 years earlier. But my doctor was aware that that radiation was going to raise my risk. So together with the doctor, we decided to alternate mammograms and MRIs. And it was an MRI that caught my cancer very, very early. And I want you to, I'm not telling you my story because mine is so special. I'm telling you that I'm very likely alive because with the help of my doctor, I knew what was unique, what my unique needs were, and dealt with them and addressed them. So if you take any point away from today, it's how to monitor yourself for your own needs, because that's what's critically important, to take responsibility for your own health. So let's talk about some of the things you need to be aware of to be able to determine personal risk and then manage it and mitigate it. Again, we don't offer medical advice. That's why I'm asking you to know yourself and your family history so you can be proactive. Like I said, 1 in 400 in the general population carry a hereditary cancer mutation known as BRCA. 1 in 40 in those of Ashkenazi descent. And there are studies that show that Mizrahi Jews, Sephardi Jews also have their own shtick and may, with regard to cancer, and may be at increased risk for this specific mutation as well. So it's really important for you to know your family cancer history. Have that talk. It's possible someone knows if they carry a BRCA, you might have heard it called BRCA mutation, but even if nobody's aware of that because it might not have been something that was addressed a generation ago, they might know their cancer history. So do it now when you have access to the most information while your family remembers. And when you're asking about family cancer history, I want you to be aware of certain things. You need to know the maternal side's history and the paternal side's history, right? We think of breast cancer as a woman's issue, but I'm telling you that men and women carry BRCA mutations in equal numbers and pass them down to male and female children in equal numbers. So even though there's never been, ovarian cancer in a man, that doesn't mean that man doesn't carry a BRCA mutation. So maternal and paternal. And ask about all cancers, not just breast cancer. The field of genetics is constantly growing. And it used to be that we assumed BRCA impacted just breast cancer. That's BR breast, CA cancer. We quickly learned also ovarian cancer. But in the more than a decade I've been with Sharsheret, we now know that someone who is a carrier of a BRCA mutation is at heightened risk for breast cancer, ovarian cancer, prostate cancer, pancreatic cancer, melanoma, male breast cancer, and there are some studies now that are leaning towards adding stomach cancer to that list, although there have been no changes in guidelines, screening guidelines yet. So never turn away knowledge. I also want to reassure you that only 5 to 10% of cancer diagnoses are hereditary in nature. The thing is, if someone does carry one of these mutations, their risk is significantly elevated. So even if there's no BRCA or other hereditary cancer mutations, it's important to know that you still have to maintain your guard and do everything you can to remain healthy. So that was number one, no family history. And that last thing leads us to number two, which is to know your own body, right? Even without a mutation, we need to know what's normal for our bodies, to be familiar, to be aware, so that we can track not only obvious changes, but subtle concerns, right? We hear breast cancer and we think, oh, a lump. And yes, a lump, but there are a lot of other symptoms of breast cancer. It could be change in color on the skin of the breast, a change in texture of the skin of the breast, discharge, puckering. There could be a lump for sure, and not just in what we consider breast tissue. It could be under the arm or underneath the breast mound. Now, I do want to say one thing. There are a lot of reasons that someone might find a lump in their breast, and most of those reasons are not cancer. So, I mean, it could be as simple as someone who has cystic breasts or changes during one's menstrual cycle. If a lump is new and doesn't go away after a week or so, then it probably needs a medical attention just to rule everything out, even though the chances are fewer than not that it's not cancer, but we check it out. Okay, so we're talking about knowing family history. We're talking about knowing our own bodies. The third thing is healthy living. We need to be proactive about our health in general, not just breast health. All the things that the doctors tell us to do that are so difficult for us to do really do mitigate risk, whether one carries a mutation or not. So what are some of the basic things? Eating well. Okay, Hanukkah's a great time to talk about it. Before we opened, the two of us were talking about sufganiyot and the good ones and the not so good ones, but they're sufganiyot, right? I'm not telling us not to have a donut on Hanukkah. I'm saying most of the time when we sit down, our plate should have a lean protein, colorful vegetables, complex carbohydrates, grains of some kind, right? And notice I also said when we sit down, because it's not healthy to eat on the run. If we do that most of the time, we can have the latke, we can have the donut, whatever it is. The next one is be active. Again, I'm not saying we need to run marathons unless you're interested, and then we can talk about Team Sharsheret because we have access to lots of marathons. But I'm saying take a walk after dinner with your partner, with your children. Take a walk in the morning with your best friend, or have a meeting not over Zoom or sitting in person, but walking around wherever you are. Park a little farther away from the entrance to the supermarket. Play soccer with your kids. Know that cleaning counts. So if we're close to Pesach and you're cleaning, that counts as exercise. Take it all into account and give yourself the credit you're due. And then the last big one is reducing stress, which I actually know is harder than the first two I mentioned, particularly for women. But it is so important to stay grounded, just like Daphne was talking about Shabbat being that barrier, and you get no credit for running yourself ragged. Stress reduction has to be a crucial part of our lives because we know that stress leads to inflammation, which leads to disease. And so it's really important to find the way that is good for you to de-stress, whether it's reading or exercising or practicing saying no or building that boundary and having Shabbat or whatever, or meditating, whatever it is. Find something that works for you and stick with it because it's so important. Those are the three biggies. There are a lot of other ones. I'm hoping nobody smokes on the screen. And I will tell you, we're learning more and more that even drinking, doesn't have to be an all or nothing thing, right? You're not getting rid of your Shabbos Kiddush and glass of wine on Friday night, but we're not drinking every night, that kind of thing. So by the drink, risk increases. And then perhaps the most important thing, and this is where we'll verve into leadership. I think the word is swerve into leadership. Commit to the appropriate screenings and don't push them off. The National Cancer Institute reported that routine screenings, cancer screenings, were down as much as 90% during COVID in some parts of the country, and predicts a negative impact on cancer outcomes for at least a decade. So we are still within that decade. And it's really important for us to take our health and the maintenance of our health seriously. There isn't a person I know that would ever let a child's lingering cough go without a trip to the pediatrician. Yet every day we say, oh, at the end of the day, I forgot to make my mammogram appointment again, or I've been coughing for a week now and it's getting worse, but I don't have time to go to the doctor, right? We put our own needs off in favor of those that we feel responsible for. But this is the reality, and this is a leadership move. You need to care for yourself. You need to put yourself on your own list. We deserve the same care we would provide for anyone we're caring for. So if you're still having trouble committing, I will say that caring for yourself is a mentoring behavior. How will your children, whether they are 3 or 33, know they need to care for themselves unless they see you caring for yourself? Anyone who's a parent knows do as I say, not as I do doesn't work, right? You cannot tell your adult daughter it's time for her to schedule a mammogram if she's never seen you go for a mammogram in her whole life. Don't just care for yourself, talk about it. Sit down at the dinner table and say, oh, by the way, I had my mammogram today. What a pain, but everything's good and I'm good for another year. say, I went for my flu shot or I had my annual exam. And speaking of annual exams, who decided that women don't need annual exams once they leave the pediatrician unless they're pregnant? I know plenty of women who don't go to the doctor unless they're sick or pregnant. Let's put an end to that today, right? Okay, we all need an annual exam. You know, all we spoke about will help lower risk. It absolutely will. But it can't, unfortunately, prevent all diagnoses. If a diagnosis does occur, though, what we talked about will help you get diagnosed sooner, may allow for less invasive treatment, and could lead to better outcomes. Being healthy gives you the strength to heal. So before we open it up for questions and I leave you with your marching orders, let's go back to your Sharsheret story. I started by telling you my Sharsheret story. What can you do to continue your Sharsheret story? So you could attend additional awareness events or education programs, join one of our webinars. We have about 4 a month. You can help plan a program of your own in your own community to educate people, a parlor meeting, a pink holiday, make it an empowering women's event between Jofa and Sharsheret. You could, like I mentioned, race with Team Sharsheret. The easiest thing to do is to go on our website, to like us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram. You can remember that we can help and share that with someone who would benefit from our help. That's one of the most important things that you can do, because we all know people who will be diagnosed with breast cancer or ovarian cancer, unfortunately. 1 in 8 women in their lifetime, whether they carry a mutation or not. And so let them know that help exists. But now what can you do today? So I'm going to give you some options and I am going to ask you to choose one. If it's been a while since you've had a mammogram and you've been forgetting to schedule it, when you get off the Zoom today, schedule that mammogram. Make a quick phone call and schedule it. Or if it's not a mammogram, your annual well check, whatever it is, schedule that appointment for self-care. Once you do it, don't forget to share that information with your family, with your friends, right? When we talk about these things, we normalize them. It's okay to tell your friends, tell the woman you sit next to on Shabbos mornings, whatever. Oh yeah, I had my mammogram this week. We're all good. When was the last time you had one of yours? I promise. These things are normalizing. If you're on top of your mammograms, then pick something else. Are you going to try and exercise on a regular basis? Are you going to talk to your family about their cancer history? Because that's information you can take to the doctor, and together you can come up with a plan for yourself. There is no one-size-fits-all plan anymore. The doctors can't even figure out, all those governmental organizations that announce a woman over 40, over 50, over 45, they keep changing when we should get mammograms. But the reality is all of those changing recommendations are for women of average risk. Just being an Ashkenazi Jewish woman makes you above average risk. And so do other things that are very common, right? Having dense breasts, things like that. So you need to take this information, your family history, your own history, to the doctor, and then you'll come up with a plan of when you'll start mammograms, how often you'll do them, what modalities you'll do, things like that. So 3 things to choose from. Schedule that mammogram or doctor's appointment. Choose one of those healthy living behaviors and learn about your family history. Over the next few months, I'm going to encourage you to commit to all of those, but today, just one. We won't make it overwhelming. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for your leadership in the community, whether it's very obvious to everybody you're a leader, you've taken on a role at the synagogue or in your community, or you're doing it in more subtle ways, like being a role model, like we talked about today. All important leadership.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Melissa. I actually had a couple of thoughts as you were talking. The first of which is if there is a non-marathon option to join Team Sharsheret, I just don't know that I have it in me to run another 26.2 miles. But
Another, you've done it once already.
oh,
Impressive.
I'm a 9-time marathon, maybe 10. I've lost
Whoa. Well, we could also do a half marathon, a triathlon, or you could do something on your own. We can talk about it after.
Sure thing. The other thoughts that came to my mind that we didn't fully touch on is that there's a lot of medical gaslighting that happens when women go and seek medical care, right? So, like, there's certainly women who put off making their appointments, and then there are women who do show up and maybe they're the ones who make appointments every time they have a hangnail and so they're dismissed. Or maybe they're overweight and they're told to just go lose weight. Or maybe they're underweight and they're told to gain weight. But like a lot of times, like doctors just make snap judgments. There are many excellent doctors, and I don't want to disparage the medical care system. But many times there are doctors who make a snap judgment without peeling back layers a little further. And the flip to that is that, from the time that we are young girls, as soon as we get our periods, we are conditioned to just live with pain. And so sometimes it's really hard to differentiate between like what's a normal cramp and what is a symptom of something that is much more serious. And then related to that, I just want to bring it back to the Torah or to halachic living. For those women who follow Nida, that we're aware of our bodies and we maybe wear family history, but like we know when something is off, when there's extra spotting, when things don't feel right, and because we're so in tuned to our monthly cycles, that's also like just something um to remind us of.
Yeah, and
Um,
the other thing, to add one more thing to what you just said, we hear a lot of people who are pregnant or nursing, and lumps get dismissed as clogged milk ducts.
yep.
And I think all I'll say about all of these things is if something lasts longer than it should, it requires additional attention, even if you have to jump and scream to get it. And it's not easy to advocate for yourself, especially when you're sitting in front of doctors. We respect doctors uh, because they are worthy of respect, but sometimes to our own detriment, because we are experts on our own bodies.
Look, the other truth is that nobody wants a serious diagnosis, right? So if the doctor's going to poo-poo it, she's going to go home and say, "Oh, he said it was nothing. She said it was nothing. It's not a big deal." Right? But
Yeah.
it's really important to be really in tune with our bodies and notice when something isn't right. Um, so I do have a couple of questions that I'm going to follow up with you.
Okay.
And that is, does one need genetic testing if there isn't a family history of breast or ovarian cancer?
So that is actually a great question. In the United States, we don't, population-wide testing does not occur. We're closer to that in Israel, but in the US, not. So nobody's going to force anybody to get a test. I will say though, and it's everybody's personal decision, but I will say that a shocking number of people who have no known family history do come out positive for a BRCA or other hereditary cancer mutation. Lots of reasons for that. It could be that there are a large number of men in a family, and so there's no ovarian cancer. Male breast cancer, even for carriers, is still much rarer than breast cancer. So it does happen that someone who has no known family history does test positive. And it's a personal decision as to whether one wants to test. Sharsheret has two genetic counselors that are happy to, without cost and confidentially, have conversations with you based on family, not only family history, but the makeup of the family, men, women, things like that. And there are people, by the way, who just don't know their family history. They might be adopted. They might have lost the majority of their family during the Holocaust. They might have small families, whatever it is. So there are a lot of people who have to make this decision for reasons other than there's a lot of cancer in my family. There's also secrecy around cancer. So you might not know if there's a family history.
And I was going to say, it's not so long ago that people talked about cancer because they couldn't say the word out loud.
There are still parts of the Jewish community that do that. There's a Yiddish euphemism that I can never remember, and I've come to accept that it's intentional that I don't remember because I don't agree with it. But there are parts of the Jewish community that use a euphemism instead and don't share even with their sisters or mothers or daughters when they are diagnosed.
Yep. I think the term is Yanamachla, something
Something
along
like
those
that.
lines.
Yeah, that sounds something
Yeah.
right.
But it's like, it's almost a fear that if you name it, it will somehow manifest itself in the people around you. And we know that cancer is not contagious.
No,
It may be widespread in certain communities, but it's not contagious. Um,
absolutely.
so what are some other ways to educate my communities more broadly? Especially it feels like I guess also like with the openness of it, that there are just more diagnoses that have arisen as of late.
Yeah, so in fact, we've had people ask us before, are diagnoses on the rise? And a couple of years ago, I did like a little bit of a deep dive to try and answer that question. And the reality was there are normal ups and downs, but we think it's simply that people are more willing to talk about it, more aware about it, and also surviving it in much greater numbers. So people can, you hear more people talking about being cancer survivors when that wasn't really a thing a decade ago.
Right.
And in fact, survivorship is a whole new field within the world of oncology. So yeah, I don't think it's happening more. There may be, because of COVID, more late stage happening right now. But that is an anomaly that hopefully will rectify itself as we get farther and farther away from COVID. So I think that openness is one of the biggest things. But in terms of our communities, I really encourage it to be addressed on a community-wide level, whether it's by having a pink Shabbat where either the rabbi speaks from the bima about this, or a survivor shares their story, and maybe it's somebody who speaks during Shalashudas. For every congregation, it'll be a little bit different.
Mhm.
Maybe it's a caregiver who speaks, maybe it's somebody from Sharsheret who speaks, or a local doctor, or whatever it is. There is no one size fits all for this type of community education because every community feels differently about it. But it should be done. And if it can't be done, like one of the things Sharsheret does is we train mikvah attendants. And I've learned to say, every once in a while we hear from a mikvah, oh, we can't put this information out because mikvah night is a night of rejoining and we don't want anybody to be stressed. So my response to that is there's really nothing more stressful than a cancer diagnosis.
Or a
But
missed cancer diagnosis.
right.
Right.
But for communities where they don't feel the mikveh is the right place, or Shabbos isn't the right place, there are plenty of other opportunities. It could, when I'm dealing with a mikveh, I say every mikveh I've ever worked with has an annual fundraising brunch. Make sure that educational resources are on every single seat for a shul as opposed to a mikvah. If there's not going to be something from the bima, then let it be like a pink challah bake, right? And not only, on Thursday night, Wednesday or Thursday night, getting a group together to make challah and while it does its first rising, learn some things that are proactive, and there's even time to go a little deeper than we did today. But if everybody makes two challahs, then they can take one of those challahs with some information and share it with someone who wasn't able to join. Maybe because they're not well themselves. So you're already taking like Bikur Cholim and caring for those who
Mhm.
are not well into account, because for communities that for whatever reason can't talk about cancer, they certainly can talk about how to care best for someone in the community facing cancer, facing illness, which is, not what Daphne focused on today, but a whole other, right, level of Jewish values and halakha and things like that. So, that's another way into the conversation. That's so important.
Absolutely. I do want to note that every mikveh that I have ever been to has a hang tag in the shower over how to do a like a self breast
Yeah.
exam. So
Yeah,
that's really
we have
important
those that
also.
we share. Yeah.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, Melissa, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to share your wisdom, to raise awareness, to inspire women and men to make sure that everybody's doing right by themselves, women in particular, and that part of living our best life is living our healthiest life, and that is as much being taking care of ourselves in the moment as it is doing the preventive care measures also. So thank you very much.
My pleasure.
And
If there are ever any questions, you can reach me through Sharsheret. I am happy to answer questions, help plan a program, connect you to support, whatever it is. And thank you for being here.